last 3 or 4 months. I don't know if Bruce, we'll just run through it lightly. I think Chris, I just asked us to do this one more time because several of these are on the agenda, and if there's any cleanup items, now will be the time. Well, while you're doing it, Dan can do part 6. Dan, that's kind of your area. You brought it up to us. For 604, 605C, 611, and 620. Did you want mine?
Sure.
Just one more time, highlight the
Yeah, so
changes.
Under part 6, which are design improvements, standards in the township ordinance, under section 604, street design, there's 2 things that we tried to accomplish within there. Number 1 was that we added an additional 2 inches of subbase to the typical street design. The subbase is the stone material that goes on before the paving is applied on top of that. So we went from 4 inches to 6 inches. In addition, we adopted a standard, a commercial standard for paving. That commercial standard is the same one that we've used in South Point, and we wanted to formalize that design in the event there's any new large commercial developments in the township. Then moving on to item 611, the stormwater management, new stormwater regulations and televising storm source system. Number 1, the stormwater management regulations have been revised to create a new freestanding stormwater management ordinance, which is designed after the model ordinance that was developed by Washington County, which came down from the DEP. This is something that we need to do as a part of our permit for stormwater in the township, the MS4 permit that the township holds. So we've adopted that stormwater management ordinance that basically mimics the model ordinance with some minor changes. Secondly, within there, we are now requiring developers prior to submitting or turning over roads for acceptance in the township to actually televise storm sewer system. We found this necessary because of the plastic pipe that contractors use on the job, and actually things that go on after the main line is installed that may compromise the integrity of those pipes. So we think this is a good idea to do. A number of the surrounding communities that are developing are doing the same thing, and I think it's worthwhile. And it is an extra expense to the developer, but in the long term it avoids issues and problems. And I think that concludes it for me.
Yeah, just on that fire hydrant on the distance spacing, I don't recall, but I want to make sure that having a set spacing distance is one thing, but sometimes it's not practical. And sometimes even through advice from the fire departments, they might have a better location than just some magic number in a book. So either Chris or Dan, do you remember if we made an adjustment where we can have a standard distance but subject to variation on approval of the board? I just can't recall that.
Is the question whether we can or whether we did?
No, whether we did. But we need to. I mean, sometimes, depending on the configuration of the layout of lots, just a magic number of 600 or 500 or 1,000 may not be the right thing to do. We don't want to be stuck putting them just because the number says 1,000.
It actually says now 500, right? Showing an average spacing of 500 feet.
Oh, you have it up to?
Yeah.
We need to add that subject to variation by the supervisors, and that's based on a recommendation of the fire departments or our staff or something like that.
Okay.
We just want to add, we need to add that clause in there. That's all I had. Bruce, you want to move on to 12?
Before we move on, does anybody have any comments or questions regarding the changes raised by Mr. Bazrat? So Bruce pulled up the amendments to section 1212, which regulate communication facilities. This ordinance that has before us, we've discussed this several times. It has been submitted to the local planning commission and also the county planning commission for review. It was submitted to the county planning commission in April of 2016. We have held several hearings on this proposed amendment, including February 16th, March 14th, April 5th, and today, June 6th. What this ordinance does is it adds definitions regulating communication towers, including context-sensitive, electronic equipment building, and stealth technology. One of the major changes takes place in section B. 1212A will now permit that applicants who are going to mount an antenna to an existing structure, such as a building, do not need to receive conditional use approval from the board. We do, however, set forth multiple requirements that they will have to meet. And these are listed in section B of the ordinance, amending 1212A, and sets forth numerous conditions for approval. One of the other major changes takes place in section 1212, or 1212I, subsection C of this ordinance, changing the setback requirements. Under the new ordinance, the setback will change from the distance of the tower to 150% of the height of the tower, and 500 feet from any residential dwelling. We will be removing the 1,000-foot setback from a recorded subdivision. This 500-foot setback from a residential dwelling may be waived. Another change applies to section 1212L, and in that we basically just clarify the requirements that an 8-foot fence be around any pad, and that the fence blend in with its surroundings to the extent practical. And finally, we added a new 1212 subsection T, requiring the submission of as-built plans to the township and a certification as to the height of the tower upon completion of the structure. There have always been comments from the audience with respect to this ordinance amendment. This is a hearing, so I suggest we open the floor.
Anybody have any questions or comments?
Oh, all right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Kevin McKeegan with Myargo and Scott. We represent TNR Properties. A couple of comments on the ordinance. First, a question though. I saw on the agenda that the ordinance is to be considered at your regular meeting. Does consideration being acted on? And if it does, was the proper advertising in terms of voting on the ordinance done?
Bruce, did we advertise for this meeting?
Yes, we did.
You advertised for adoption of the ordinance, not a public hearing.
Did we?
To my knowledge, we did, yes.
Okay, I just want to be sure because adoption requires a second special advertising. I'm just asking for that in place. I'm talking about the public hearing, I'm talking about the actual vote.
Give me this copy. Can I show you this?
Sure. I'm just asking a question.
I know, here's what after.
Okay, typically, I'm not, having just seen that, typically I would always say that most advertising or ordinances that be adopted actually uses the words adoption, at least this says consideration. So I would caution that I'm not sure that proper advertising for vote on the ordinance is taking place yet. Secondly, while the solicitor is looking at that, I want to point out that there's kind of an ambiguity that's been created in this ordinance. Since section 1212, new section 1212A6, which talks about communication, as it's written, it says communication antennas shall be permitted to exceed the height limitations of the applicable zone district by no more than 20 feet. The problem is that the definition of a communication antenna includes antennas and other devices that are mounted on towers. So you kind of set up an ambiguity with respect to the height of the communication antenna versus a tower, which is allowed to be 200 feet tall. I don't think you intended to limit where the antenna can go on the tower, but I think you created an ambiguity the way the ordinance is currently drafted. So I would suggest that on that one, you exclude from the 20-foot limitation communication antennas that are mounted on communication towers. Those are, I think that's a relatively easy fix, but I think it's an ambiguity in the ordinance right now, as it's presented right now. Thirdly, and most importantly, and I did make this comment in an earlier meeting, so I won't belabor the point. I would ask the board to carefully consider the distance requirement, especially the requirement that it be greater of 150% of the height of the tower or 500 feet from an existing residential dwelling. Again, I would just remind you that you have, in certain residential districts, relatively narrow yard requirements, 10-foot side yards, for example, 30-foot rear yards. So you're really, if you think about a circle and how much could, in theory, be carved out and be not open for use as a tower, you're really creating quite a number of issues throughout the township in terms of that 500-foot limitation.
But would the 10-foot setback work to, say, applicant's advantage?
No, because the point is you would have a house 10 feet from the yard, and then you would have to go an additional 490 feet to be away from the house. So my point is the 500 feet, if the house is right up against the property line, is going to take a lot of property out of consideration for erection of the tower.
How many, I mean, in reality, how many houses sit?
Well, I'm not sure about reality now, but you have to think about reality 5 years from now or 10 years from now, when there's going to be more residential development in the township and the need for more communication towers is also going to be present. So you need to, what I'm suggesting is that the line drawing here, and I understand there needs to be some line drawing, that's part and parcel of the zoning ordinance. We're suggesting the line drawing here was drawn a little bit too aggressive. I think
what would your recommendation be?
I would recommend 150% limitation. That puts you at least 300 feet from the property line, plus whatever the yards are in the zoning district.
I guess I'm thick. Explain to me why, if my house is 10 feet from the line.
Because the ordinance reads 150% of the tower height to the property line, or
Which let's assume it's 300 feet.
or greater of 500 feet from the dwelling. So if the house is 10 feet from the dwelling, or excuse me, if the house is 10 feet from the yard line, you have to go an additional 490 feet, not 300 feet, 490 feet to be 500 feet away from the house. The way the ordinance is drafted, it's not 500 feet from the property line, it's 500 feet from where the dwelling is. Okay?
Right.
So if the dwelling has a narrow yard, your ordinance permits relatively narrow yards, you're pushing the tower a considerable distance away from where it otherwise is.
Or I guess